Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America, where each episode we bring you a brand new interview with one of the film industry's top directors, conducted by one of their peers. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on Google Play Music, iTunes, Stitcher, or on our SoundCloud page at soundcloud.com/thedirectorscut. This episode takes us behind the scenes of director Peter Berg's new film, Patriots Day. Drawn from real-life accounts, the film brings us back to the horrific Boston Marathon bombings of April 15, 2013, when terrorists set off 2 pressure cooker bombs near the marathon's finish line, killing 3 civilians and injuring an estimated 264 others. The film weaves together the stories of the heroic first responders and the investigators who raced against the clock to hunt down the bombers before they could strike again. In addition to Patriots Day, Mr. Berg's credits include the feature films Deepwater Horizon, Lone Survivor, Very Bad Things, The Rundown, Friday Night Lights, The Kingdom, Hancock, King's Ransom, and Battleship, the television movies Virtuality and Bloodline, the pilot episodes for the television series Wonderland, Friday Night Lights, Prime Suspect, and The Leftovers, and episodes of the television series Chicago Hope, 30 for 30, and Entourage. Following a recent screening of Patriots Day at the DGA Theater in Los Angeles, Mr. Berg spoke with fellow director Edward Zwick about the challenges he faced while making the film. During their conversation, Mr. Berg discusses striving for authenticity in the film, which involved spending time reaching out to the Boston community before filming started, capturing what he describes as the personality of the Watertown gunfight, and his collaboration with composers Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who brought their characteristic edge to the film's score.
Good evening. After a movie like this, I find that rather than go to the traditional how did it begin and why did you decide to do it, when you're feeling emotional after a movie like this, I think sometimes it's best to stay in that moment and try to talk about some of the feelings of it. And, to that end, when you and I were talking last night, I mentioned something that had been very meaningful to me in my youth. It was a novel by Thornton Wilder called The Bridge at San Luis Rey, which is about a bridge that went out in South America where 5 strangers had all come together and just happened to be on the bridge at the same time. And at the end of that, at the end of the book, he writes a paragraph, and I just was going to read the paragraph and then ask you to talk about it. He says, "But soon we shall die, and all memory of those 5 will have left the earth, and we ourselves shall be loved for a while and forgotten, but the love will have been enough. All these impulses of love return to the love that made them. Even memory is not necessarily for love. There is a land of the living and a land of the dead, and the bridge is love, the only survival, the only meaning."
Wow.
Go.
Ouch. That's beautiful. Thank you all, first of all, for coming in the holiday season. I know everybody's busy, so I appreciate it so much. Thank you very much, Ed. I've known you a long time, and it means a lot to me for you to do this. I feel a lot of love. Mm-hmm. So, I think when Mark Wahlberg and I were finishing up Deepwater Horizon, when he came up to me and he asked me if I would go to Boston with him, and I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I want to talk to you about doing a film about the marathon bombing," and I didn't really have an opinion, but I could tell Mark really felt something, so I went with him and spent I think like 4 days in Boston. And, Mark really is so beloved in that community that people very quickly, he put me in front of a lot of different people who were affected by the marathon bombing, police commissioners, FBI agents, hospital workers, this young Chinese immigrant named Danny Meng, who's just the most amazing human being I've ever met in my life, period. And so many of the parents of the victims, people who lost their children, and survivors who lost their legs. And I started having this experience with this group of people who had been through something, very violent and very intense, and very confusing. And the impression that just I kept getting, and the emotion that kept coming up was quite simply love, that these people had managed to endure what is unfortunately becoming this new gruesome reality. Like we're no longer shocked when we wake up and turn on the news and one of these mass casualty attacks has occurred. And to be able to go to Boston with Mark and meet these extraordinary people and see that, if you're looking to make sense of this kind of nonsensical, horrific experience, the thing that does resonate is that love really thrives. And the intended effect of these terrorists is to destroy us and to disrupt us and to cause us to retreat into fear. But what we saw in Boston was just the opposite. So I love that quote you wrote, and we really did make this to celebrate that love.
I did something once before about terrorism, and something that was really interesting to me is how already ahead of the curve some of the law enforcement were in anticipation of that. And something happened in Boston that was very unique and I think controversial too, which is the decision to lock down the entire city. And you talk about that a little bit in the movie. Mm-hmm. And was that something that you talked to these guys about that moment?
We did. We talked to Governor Patrick, who Michael Beach plays in the film, and and I asked him, I said, "Well, you locked down your whole town, man. Wow." Yeah. And I don't think that would have happened in Los Angeles at all. I think it would have been like chaos, and maybe New York would have sort of followed along with it for about an hour. But Boston did it, I'm like, well, he's like, we did it. We sure did. And I said, well, how did you come to that decision? And it was actually not as kind of cool and sexy as it sounds, because they knew that they had Johar Tsarnaev, the younger brother. They believed they had him contained in a relatively small area. But then they had the Department of Transportation guy there who said, well, there's one bus line. If he got on this bus line, he could have gotten to this train line. If he got to the train line, and it became that, so they were going to lock down a bus line, then a train line, and then they realized that it was just impossible to predict. If he wasn't where they thought he was, it was impossible to predict it. And the governor said, can we lock down the city? And everybody said, sure, we'll lock it down. And, I did when Mark, my memory of the Boston saga prior to going up there and with Mark was, I think it was a bumper sticker I saw. It might have been a T-shirt that said, Boston, if you us, we will lock up our city, hunt you down, and kill you. and I'm all about the love. I am. But I thought that was memorable.
Well, that raises a whole other issue, which is more directorial, I think, which is to say, you're talking about something of extraordinary scale, and you're trying to give it geographic clarity. At the same time of that big scale, you're also trying to focus on all these lives. And what kind of a challenge was that?
It definitely this is the third film that I've done that's nonfiction that has involved a pretty significant loss of life. And part of the process of making these kinds of films is a pretty heavy pre-production, where we're writing the script, but we're also going into the community very deeply and meeting people like Patrick and Jessica Downs, who you see in the film, or the Wolfington family, or the families of the victims, the 4 people who were killed, the police that Sean Collier worked with, the police officer from MIT, actually going to MIT and meeting with the president. And we were the first film that ever got permission to film, which I didn't know on MIT. Even Good Will Hunting had to steal their shots. Yeah. But we were allowed to go there. So there's so much meeting of these different, individuals. And in Boston, it's not really just Boston PD, because you've got Boston PD, Watertown PD, Cambridge PD, MIT, Department of Fish and Game, Transit, FBI, State Police, and they're all very territorial. So they all were involved very, significantly in those 4 days. So we spent a tremendous amount of time reaching out into the community. Though you have to be pretty honest and transparent. These are very smart people who are still grieving. We have, sometimes we joke, and you and I both produced, and as directors, we're all directors in here, right? Right. So we know, like, sometimes producers, that we don't know what they do for us, right? Like are there any producers in the room? Are there any producers? Okay, so talk candidly. So sometimes producers are really a big pain in the ass for us. In this case, we had really great producers. We had a great studio in CBS and a great team from CBS who could help, because I couldn't do it all by myself. And every day someone would get upset, or someone would be concerned, someone in the community. So I was trying to make a movie, and I needed a lot of help to manage the city of Boston, and I had a lot of help.
I was just thinking about the need to cleave close to the truth based on all the research that you do, and then the obligatories of doing a 2-hour movie, and how each day in each scene you face a set of choices about the compression of one thing, the conflation of two incidents together, the shortening or the adding of dialogue that you could only have imagined. Yeah. And you face that all the time.
Yeah. I think so much of this event was documented, and that was an advantage in terms of not having to make up that much dialogue, and we could talk to people, and whether it's Ed Davis, the commissioner, or it's Rick DeLaurier, who's the head of the FBI, we could talk to them and get very pretty accurate recaps of what the dialogue was. With the Tsarnaev brothers, that was obviously a bit trickier, including Catherine Russell, who I found to be such a fascinating character, who were very hard to understand and create a scenario where she wasn't aware of something, and the FBI could never prove it. But we knew that this interrogation with her and the CIA organization, that's who interrogated her in the film, occurred. They wouldn't tell us what they said, but they played literally a game of hot and cold with us. So they said, well, we asked her whether there were any more bombs. So we wrote this scene, and we'd send it to them, and they say, no, this is very cold. This is a little warm. This is actually hot. So we'd write more. And they, that's very hot. And it was literally hot and cold. I was like back in 6th grade with the CIA. And it ended up being one of my favorite scenes. The biggest, I think, liberty that we ended up taking was actually creating a composite character for Mark Wahlberg, because there was no single police officer
as a narrative thread.
Yeah, and there was no narrative thread, and there was no super cop. We didn't have Jason Bourne running in and whooping. But there were several police officers, 2 in particular, who one was very involved in Boylston Street when the bombs went off, who kind of took control, and that's the first. That was a cop named Danny Keeler. Is Danny Keeler in here? Okay, good. So he did a lot, but he didn't do all of it. And these guys are very, big characters, big personality guys. So we had to make him understand that.
Yeah. How did they react to the fact that they were used as part of composites?
Well, they when you talk about not wanting to get into what a phrase that I like called stolen valor. Have you heard that? Where,
yeah, sure.
You assign somebody credit for a bunch of heroic actions they didn't do. If you really say, to someone, look, you did a lot, but you really want to take from, and then of course any reasonable person will say no, which they didn't always say. They were like, yeah, I'll take some valor. It's okay. But no, they were very they were very willing to not have that stolen valor. So with Mark, we did take two police officers who were both extraordinary guys and combine that.
I had a conversation with J.K. about the shootout and about what he did, about Pugliese. And it's one of the most remarkable moments in the movie. And that, as best I can tell, with one certain exception about some eye gouging, it was literally almost, literally round for round, 7,000 rounds expended, literally the bombs thrown. That was pretty damn close. Yeah,
we spent a whole bunch of time at the Watertown Police Department with the 5 officers, and we started with, we drew we taped off part of the floor in their conference room to make the Laurel Street, and we used toy police cars and stick figures and just went man for man trying to capture the experience of everyone. We listened to, on YouTube, there's not good visual, but you could hear the gunfight and get a sense of how many rounds were fired, and you hear these bombs. And, we walked that street then up and down it over and over until we had a pretty accurate sense. And, with that gunfight, and, I always think like you need to find out the personality of a gunfight. Every fight, like a love scene or an argument or a family dinner scene, there's got to be a personality to it. And the personality of what happened on Watertown was, these cops, they weren't tough cops. They were used to doing traffic stops, and a guy had been drunk and was sitting in his car passed out. That they were, they're great people, but they had never fired their weapons in the line of duty. And suddenly, they're excited. They think they have a stolen car, and that's a big deal.
Right.
And they're ready to go on a stolen car. And then, exit, Tamerlan Tsarnaev and the bombs. And these guys were hanging on, and that was really what we tried to capture and not get caught up. The guns are whatever, it's always cool to have guns going on a set, but we tried to hold on to the fear and the human element of that gunfight.
Mm-hmm. When you're trying to figure out a story that where the end is known, and you're working toward it, you're trying to create some structure, but the structure is not typical because it's not your 3-act structure. It's very different. So how did you deal with that?
That was challenging because if you divorce yourself from the emotional reality of this story, and this is a real story, and this is about terrorism, and you look at it objectively as a filmmaker or a writer, the climax of the film comes too early, right? Yep. So you've got this big gunfight in Watertown, and then you essentially have every gun in New England hunting a 17-year-old kid, a little bit older, and a 19-year-old kid who's, hiding in a boat. So there was never a question about, are they going to get him? And that was something that, I struggled with a bit, especially in the early stages of writing the script and working with my writing partner in this, Matt Cook. We knew that was a challenge. And I think knowing that Big Papi was going to come on at the end and say what he said, that, when you're always looking for, I don't know how you are, but I'm always looking for some kind of lifeline early on. Like, do I have any idea of how this thing's going to
make it
end?
To this point?
Yeah.
Yes.
And you never totally know, so you look for it, right? And to be able to look at that footage of Big Papi saying, this is our city. Okay, that felt good. Mm-hmm. So it was a question of how do we get there? And I felt that early on, we're lucky we had Michael Radutsky and Jeff Fager, who run 60 Minutes, and they were producers, and they're great guys. And I was pretty sure that I wanted to have the real ending of the film be throw it all back to the real people. And suddenly I realized that, if I was going to do interviews with the real people, I had the best interviewers in the world, and just sitting there. So I say producers can really be awesome and do wonderful things. So I talked to Jeff Fager, who's a great guy, who's got a picture of him arm wrestling Putin above his desk. If you ever go to his office, he's a tough guy. I think he let Putin win, but I'm not sure. with the arm wrestling. But I said, well, you guys do these interviews, and they went and did a ton of really, really great interviews. And when I started getting the footage in and we started editing them, then I could kind of build that ending and then trim things to get there quicker. But it was tricky because the climax, as a writer, you're going, well, you wish the fight had happened at the very end, but it didn't.
It occurs to me that technology has had this very interesting effect. You see it particularly this year. I don't know if anybody here has seen Jackie yet, or if you've seen it, Pete, because you've been kind of busy. But he does something that you do too, which is there's the ability now, because of the sophistication and the ease of roto and shooting stocks in the DI, to emulate each other, to literally place fictional actors within real settings and to blur those lines. And I think you did it very well here. I think they do it. I don't know if anybody's seen that movie. They do it very well there as well. And I think it's very interesting to think about that as a certainly the blessings of it and also the dangers of it, because you could again completely falsify things because you have utter license to do what you want. But how much did you think about that in terms of pre-production, in terms of literally planning this footage? I was going to create this thing to put within it.
I always have these big ideas and I get all excited about them in pre-production. And in the case of, it always happens with me. And now my crew just laugh at me because I come up with these big ideas sitting around. And we had found some real shots that the FBI gave us from Boylston Street that were from cell phones. And they're pretty amazing, like 15-second running shots of, just sort of chaos right after the bombs went off. And I was going to put Wahlberg in those shots, interacting with the real people. And, we'd blocked it out and rehearsed it. And the visual effects company had made Mark, rehearse on a green screen stage, going from dot to dot to dot. And I just got bored with it. Like a week before we were ready to do it, I'm like, I'm not doing this. I don't want to do it. It feels gimmicky. And no matter how real it is, I just don't want to do it. And that's on Deepwater Horizon. I devised a 5-hour Steadicam shot. The whole movie was one shot basically in my mind. And I pulled the plug on that too. Because
you are using some real footage and crowd replacement, yes. It seems to me.
Well, we did. So then, because it's just not my style. I tend to not, it's a complete personal choice. And if I see, Alfonso Cuarón, for example, does incredible shots. It's just, that's his style. I don't, it's not my style. But there were so much when we got this footage, the cell phone footage and the surveillance footage, and when I saw how much my actors looked like the Tsarnaev brothers, and I could go back and forth, There's so much real footage in the movie. I don't know if you guys were aware of that, but I assume you were, that, all that stuff on Boylston Street with the white hat, black hat, that's the real Tsarnaev brothers, the gas station, the bank. The fact that this younger brother went to Whole Foods an hour and a half after, and we had this footage of him, changing a bottle of milk, that I really liked doing. Yeah. And, I'll tell you something interesting that we added, when we did CG shots of Boylston Street, we would add ash and smoke and debris to put, and, when we used the real shots, they didn't quite match because there ended up being more debris and ashes in our shots than the real shots. So I asked the head of this visual effects company, Zero Effects. It's a wonderful little company in Boston that does great work. And I said, will you just make them match? So add a little more embers into the real footage. And they said, okay. And then they came back a couple weeks later and they said, look, our guys are all from Boston. They're not going to manipulate the real shots. They don't feel right about that. And I had to respect that, they were like, if you're going to use this, we're not going to touch it out of respect for, what was in those shots. So, it's not 100% consistent, but I kind of like that.
Yeah, me too. One thing that you do, I think, with your composers is create this feeling of imminence very early, and you use them to great effect. to try to sustain things which are often going to cross narratives from one person to the other, or trying to create sequences when there might not have been a sequence, and I think you use them as glue in many times. Is that something you talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever done a film that I haven't done my temp score with Trent Reznor and Atticus. They're just so good, and so when I got them, I've never used them before, so it's a process to get them. They're like a hard date, you got to really work and charm them and buy them flowers and flirt and not be very charming. And I did that, which I'm not good at, and I did it, and they said yes. And I remember when I went and told Colby Parker Jr. is my editor, he went crazy. I mean, he just started jumping up and down, screaming and bouncing around the room, and it was very. One of the best parts was just watching the editor's reaction when he heard. But these guys then, I knew with Trent and Atticus, tension and edge wouldn't be a problem. I mean, they're so good at that. So we talked about letting them do something a little more peaceful and gentle in the beginning, and then starting to add elements. And I mean, if you really listen to what they did, it's so extraordinary. And it starts out very tender and sweet, and then it starts this Trent Reznor, disturbing, throbbing thing starts to emerge. And when we got it, it was just like, wow, they're very talented.
But ironically, the sweetness too, and the emotional stuff is the payoff at the end as well.
Yeah.
And I know that, you've been drawn to something like, I know you've used Explosions in the Sky before.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've used Philip Glass, but he's sort of the dean of all of that.
Yeah.
And it's actually a different style of composition that seems to be sort of.
Yeah, it started on Friday Night Lights when I wanted to do football, but not. I wanted to find a more emotional, access point musically, something that felt more soulful and less aggro. And there's a guy named Brian Reitzel who had done Sofia Coppola's film Lost in Translation. I remember loving that score, and I found him, and I'm like, would you do a football movie? And he's so not a football guy. He's like this hipster kind of Echo Park, Silver Lake guy. And he's like, well, do you want me to do a football movie? I'm like, yeah, I think it'll be. He's like, will you let me do it my way? I'm like, and he went and hitchhiked around Texas, literally hitchhiked, and went to Midland. And he called me. He's like, I found this band, Explosions in the Sky. They're going to do all the music. And he played me it, and I got it right away. I was smart. I didn't discover it. It wasn't but I was smart enough to understand it, that it was a good idea. And that was an interesting learning, moment for me, that it can be really interesting to kind of mess with the musical expectations. Right. So to even get Trent and Atticus and say, sweeten this up, and don't show restraint before you attack.
Right.
I think was effective.
We have time for a couple of questions. If anybody's got one they want to just yell out. Is there a hand out there? Anybody? Oh, don't jump up all at once. Right. Yeah. She's asking about the casting.
Okay, so I hate, I used to be an actor, and he never cast me, by the way. I auditioned for him.
He claimed this evening that he read for me, and I didn't cast him. I'm not sure this is true.
I really, because I fall in love with almost every actor. I have so much empathy for how tough it is. So I just try to cast everyone, and and then people, Pete, you already cast that role 3 times. I mean, no, but, and I really so hate saying no to actors, especially because there's so many good actors, and I just know from being on that side. So I basically tell Sheila Jaffe, I'm just cast the movie. Like if there's a real problem, I say, Sheila, who should I cast? I mean, I know I want to cast Mark. And Sheila's like, I found your Danny Meng, this kid Jimmy that played the Danny Meng. She's like, I got him. I go, let me see a tape. Obviously, he was fantastic. Whether it's, Kevin Bacon just looks so much. She's like, look, Kevin Bacon looks just like him. I go, okay, great, let's cast him. John Goodman looks just like Ed Davis. Okay, great, let's cast him. I don't want to meet Kevin Bacon, it's like, and then not give him the part. It'd just be horrible. So I And then with actresses, I'm horrible because I fall in love with all of them. You know, the actresses are so charming when they come in that I can't even talk to actresses. But I really do, you know, my approach to filmmaking has become like, I've worked with the same crew over and over, and I trust them so much. And I try to stay, you know, and if I will see some actors. I mean, I'm not being literal, but I really don't like, I won't see 50 actors. I don't agonize. I tend to make very quick, impulsive decisions and have good people around me to check me on it before, you know, sometimes I'm like, you know.
But, you know, I would say that actually you're describing as something improvisational, really. And then I think that actually pertains to a lot of your technique, even in shooting a movie. Because I think it happened, we were talking just backstage before about how you solve problems of schedule and time with the developing of a style that allows actors to do a certain thing in the way that feels right, and yet you're going to find a way to sort of gang it and get it.
Okay. And I do make sure that any actor I work with knows, like I do have a pretty weird style of filming. I shoot 3 cameras. I don't cut. We go over and over. We'll make up scenes in the middle of it. It's very playful and improvisational. And I do check and make sure that everyone's okay with that, because some actors hate it. So I really hate auditioning actors, though.
Yeah, back there.
Yeah, he's asked me how about the Zarnaeff brothers. You know, I was able to do a lot of research on them, and I spent a lot of time. The older brother wanted to represent the U.S. Olympic team and the boxing team. He was actually a pretty good boxer. Spent a lot of time with his boxing trainer and several other people that knew him from that gym in Boston. I spent some time with some of Johar's friends and 2 of his ex-girlfriends. Spent time with the landlord that owned that apartment that they all lived in. Read the transcripts from Johar's trial. And so I had a lot of information. I thought I had a pretty decent understanding of who they were, what their patterns of life were like, what their personalities were like, what the dynamic between the 2 of them. I had a decent understanding of how the radicalization occurred and how it got to, and then it became a question of, well, okay, what do I really think about these guys, and what do I want the takeaway to be, you know? And at the end of the day, I don't consider them, having done this research, to be in any way righteous men. I don't consider them to be Muslim. I consider them to be narcissistic sociopaths and cowards. And I found what they did to be just disgusting on every level. That being said, well, I do, and I think it's important that we recognize that. The fact that they were so assimilated into American culture. This wasn't like Muhammad Atta coming over 9/11 with the Saudis blowing up the towers and, you know, sneaking in.
Well, the simple fact that he wanted to represent the United States
US.
on the boxing team.
And he was furious. It's all public info. He was on his way to representing the U.S. and some people had it out for him, and he lost a fight, and he felt that was because he was Muslim, and that then started but I felt that it was worth taking a look at these 2 individuals. I wanted to make sure we didn't glamorize them, that we portrayed them as as I said earlier, assign them those types of characteristics. And I didn't want their role to overpower the other storylines in the film. But I did think the fact that they were as assimilated as they were into our country made them fair game for some representation in the film.
I think they've got another movie coming in. I just want to say that it's really remarkable that this marks the 3rd time that you've managed to make a movie that's really about our experience, that's about the truth and the search for the truth. And I think it's so admirable, and I only hope you get to keep doing it. So thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for coming. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this DGA Q&A. Check out past episodes of the podcast by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts or on our website at dga.org/podcast. We'll have a lot more episodes coming your way over the next several weeks, so stay tuned. If you haven't already, please subscribe to The Director's Cut on iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, or our SoundCloud page so you won't miss an episode. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks for listening, and have a great week. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.